Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Finally we're getting around to more Charlie Parker, one of my absolute favourite bebop legends, and we're going to learn one of his most well-known pieces, the great Donna. This little finger tangler is quite an intense technical workout, but more than that, it's a great place to harvest bebop lines from. You know, really iconic pieces of jazz vocabulary are just scattered all the way through this piece. So as usual, as we make our way through it, I'll be highlighting some of these key areas to focus on, with the hopes that you can add them to your own vocabulary. We'll also look at some really neat ways of playing through the chords on this piece, using some traditional voicings and common jazz manoeuvres. So if you're a Charlie Parker fan, or if you just fancy getting a little bit more of that jazz and bebop lingo under your fingers, then stick around for the next 20 minutes or so. As always, you can get hold of my lesson materials at the links in the description. This includes neatly typed out Guitar Pro and PDF tab and notation of this piece, plus the chord chart as well. I'll also include 2 audio files, one with the full performance on and one that's just my chord part, so you can jam over the top of it. One of the well-known obstacles when it comes to learning one of these legendary Charlie Parker heads is in how to organize these notes on the fretboard to make them guitar friendly. Now personally, I always transcribe everything from scratch by ear. I don't use tabs or other sources. I always go straight back to the original, listen closely, and notate it myself, and then I spend hours and hours trying to find the best fingerings for it and the way to lay it out on the fretboard that feels the most guitaristic. And I believe I've done a decent job of this one here today. So of course that's what you're getting with the tab as well. You're getting all those countless hours worth of me sitting there experimenting with every possible position to play these licks in, till I found the way that seemed to flow the best. So this piece is in the key of A flat major. There's a lot of secondary dominant motion in there and a lot of secondary 2/5s and stuff, which we'll highlight as we go. But we start the song simply on the 1 chord. So typically like an A flat major 7th, or a major 6th perhaps. Now the phrase we play over that sounds like this. So this is all A flat major scale, aside from a sneaky little passing note. This note here. The rest of it is just plain A flat major scale stuff. This little passing note is the sharpened 5th leading to the natural 5th. So at that point we have what people call the bebop major scale, or what Barry Harris might call the major 6th diminished scale. Now I'm not going to break down every fret number for you because that's what the tab sheets are for. You know, if I was to do that, this lesson would end up being like 4 hours long. But I think the important thing here is just to be able to see the general outline of whatever scale or arpeggio or chord is being targeted, so that you can understand how this language works on a deeper level. But I'll mention a couple of little technical things, like for example here on the B string, that's all legato. You pick that 8th fret, hammer onto 9, pull back off to 8, pull off again to 6, then move to the G string, slide from frets 6 to 5, and then to the D string. At this point we're actually now playing over the next chord. So the chord sequence so far is A flat major to F7, and we're going to target the major 3rd of that F7. Listen for how that lands. Very clear, right, that we're hearing A flat major 7 to F7. Now continuing on with the F7, he plays this very common piece of Charlie Parker vocabulary, the 3rd, then down to the 5th, and then the flat 7 and the root. Which is an interesting thing, right? One of the things we always think about with Charlie Parker is his use of pivots. That's where you switch quickly from one octave to another. So you know, if we played an ascending F7 arpeggio from the 3rd, you'd have this group of notes in this order: 3, 5, flat 7, root. That sounds cool, but it sounds much cooler and less linear if you then put a pivot in there somewhere. So for example, after the 3rd, instead of climbing to the 5th, drop to the 5th in that lower octave, and then continue your climb up flat 7 and root. Easy way to make a lick sound fresh. I use that stuff all the time. It's great for the blues. Okay, now on to the next phrase. We're now going to be playing over a B flat dominant 7, essentially for 2 bars. We might put a little movement in there in our chord part. We might put a little sneaky 2 chord in, you know, the F minor 7. But essentially we can just think B flat dominant, and here's the phrase that we play. So most of those notes can be found within your B flat Mixolydian scale. And he especially likes to highlight the arpeggio off the 3rd of that scale. So this would be the D minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. So same thing as a 3 to 9 arpeggio if we're thinking of B flat as the 1, the D is the 3, the F is the 5, the A flat is your flat 7, and the C is the 9. You'll have seen me mention that a lot in my jazz videos, especially the Charlie Christian ones. You know, he was a big fan of doing the same thing. It's also nice to point out that the D minor 7 flat 5 is just a rootless way of playing a B flat dominant 9. So it all makes sense. So now we've basically got the first 4 bars of the head, and I'd consider that to be the first real chunk of melody. That's the A flat major 7, F7, B flat 7. Now we're moving into the next part of the progression where we're going to be hitting a 2-5-1 in our key of A flat. So that's a B flat minor 7 to an E flat 7 to an A flat major 7. And he plays this. So he starts off with a full enclosure around the 6th fret of the A string. Then he approaches the root of the B flat minor 7 from a semitone below, before climbing a really nice arpeggio, a B flat minor 11 arpeggio. And again, there's a few ways you can look at that. You can simply think B flat minor 11, root, flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11. Or you might want to think of it as an arpeggio off the flat 3 of the B flat minor. Now that would be a D flat major 7 arpeggio. Or you might think of it as F minor 7. So that's off the 5th of the B flat minor. It's important to know your arpeggios off the various points within the chord. You know, have all that stuff down, arpeggios within arpeggios. These guys really like to target those upper extensions, you know, especially the 9 and the 11. Then he kind of goes into this honeysuckle rose type of lick, where again we're still thinking of that B flat minor 7, we come back from the 11 to the flat 3, and then climb that F minor triad that gives us the 5th, the flat 7 and the 9 of the B flat. Then he moves into the E flat 7 and plays this great thing here, goes to the sharpened 5th to give us that augmented, altered dominant sound on the 5 chord. From the sharp 5 he goes straight into another alteration, the flat 9. So again that sound of a dominant chord with a flat 9 and a sharp 5. The root, the flat 7, because remember we're really thinking E flat 7 here at this point, and then resolves that flat 7 down to the major 3rd of your A flat major chord. Great little 2-5-1 lick, and this is one of the phrases I would really recommend highlighting and trying to learn in every key and drop into your own solos, even if it's just this little chunk of it here that neatly fits into those bars. You know, very clearly outlines that 2-5-1 in the key of A flat. You might want to get your looper involved just to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4. Play around with it a little bit, reshape it, try different endings. And resolve into the 5th instead of the 3rd of the A flat. Point is, play around with it, get it under your fingers. Now we're on the A flat chord. He doesn't just finish on the 3rd, he goes into this lovely little phrase, which again is just ascending the arpeggio off the major 3rd of the chord, like we did with the B flat 7 earlier on, and with the B flat minor 7. You know, if we know our arpeggios off the 3rd of a chord, it can really help us access those upper extensions very easily. So over the A flat major 7 chord, we can be thinking C minor 7, because that's the 3rd chord of the key. So when we superimpose that over an A flat chord, we're getting the 3rd, the 5th, the 7 and the 9. So we're doing away with the root and replacing it with something a little more fancy sounding. And then we bring the root back in before moving into another 2-5-1 phrase. This time we're targeting the 4 chord of our key, so that's the D flat major. So what's the 2-5 of D flat? E flat minor 7, A flat dominant 7. And then there's your D flat major 7. So that's what we're thinking now, and we play this phrase. Another killer and very liftable 2/5 lick. So that's just over the E flat minor 7 and the A flat 7 part of that progression. And what are we doing? We're doing exactly what we just spoke about. We're playing the arpeggio off the 3rd of your E flat minor chord. So this is the flat 3. And that would be a G flat major 7th arpeggio. And notice how he ascends the scale up to that 3rd before ascending the arpeggio. And then there's your dominant 7. I always like to hear these things in chord form. So to me that's the E flat minor 7, and then you can hear how that would work over the A flat 7 with the raised 5th. Then on the D flat he resolves to the 9th of the chord. We're going to play it on the 8th fret of the G string actually, implying that major 9 sound. Beautiful stuff. And again, let me just interrupt and really drive this point home, that the important thing to do here is take a phrase, lift it out of this context and apply it to something else. As long as you can see how it works, you can do that very easily. Let's take that phrase. Again, we said that was a 2/5 in D flat, and immediately move it to another key. Let's say the key of F. Put something in your looper that resembles that. Chuck that lick in on the top. Again, play around with it. Try another key, key of C. Again, the idea is to play around with these things, get them to become moldable like putty under your fingers, so you can just throw them in when you're playing over any good old jazz standard. They're all going to contain 2/5s, so this stuff really does set you up very well. Now I realise this is turning into a long lesson. It's taking a while to make our way through this because there are so many good talking points. To be totally honest, I could make a 6-video series on just this one piece, but I'm sure you appreciate that we have to kind of abridge things a little bit. Again, this is why the sheet music is there available for you. So let's make our way through at a slightly quicker pace now. On this D flat major 7, we're going to play D flat major scale stuff. Now we're really on the D flat minor 7 in the next bar. That's our 4 minor, where we play this to get us back to the 1, the A flat. If you've seen my plagal cadence video, that'll already make a lot of sense to you. We're just targeting things from a D flat melodic minor, really, and resolving to A flat. This time we're grabbing the 3rd as our point of resolution. On that A flat major 7, that's again all major scale stuff, but with a bit of chromaticism. You know, it's a very common thing to hear, where you chromatically join the 3rd to the 5th, and the other way around, of course, is possible. And then the F7 comes along again, and we play a very common Djangoism. Again, resolving now to the 3rd of B flat in the next bar. That's such a cool phrase, let me just break it down. So F7, we're climbing its arpeggio from the 3rd, 3, 5, flat 7, 1, slide up a semitone and you've got your fancy flat 9 again. And then again we want to get the sharp 9 sound before going back to the root, then the flat 7, and then resolving to the 3rd of the B flat 7. It's important to be able to hear this stuff in chord form. Essentially what we're hearing here. Now I called that a Djangoism because to me that's where I first encountered and learned that phrase. So for those pedants in the comments section that like to bring me up on who invented what, I'm not really concerned with that. You know, I can easily look that up on Wikipedia or something. I'm talking about where I first heard it, and as your teacher in this context, I think that's valid. Anyway, Bill Jennings also really loved to use that phrase, as did Wes Montgomery. It's such a great piece of vocabulary on a dominant 7th. Anyway, I'd really recommend getting that into your muscle memory so you can use it anytime a dominant 7th chord crops up and you want to inject a little bit of that gypsy flavour. Now this phrase here is kind of crazy. I'm not going to try and explain it because I don't really fully understand it myself, but on the B flat 7 he plays this now. Again, it has echoes of that honeysuckle rose type of rhythm. The way that phrase works. He's really enclosing that B flat note there, isn't he, for the B flat dominant. He's really going for it from either side before playing that kind of style of phrase we spoke about earlier, but this time on, maybe we could be thinking F minor 7, we could be thinking of the 2 that would be attached to that 5. I don't know if I'm overthinking it. And then targeting the flat 5 of the B flat dominant. I think that's the key thing, targeting the flat 5 at the end of the phrase. The rest of it we can just call chromatic enclosure goodness on a 2-5. Now he does go back to that honeysuckle rose type of phrase on the 2-5-1 to get us back to the A flat chord. He plays killer 2-5-1 lick. Again, one I've lifted and used many times in other contexts and reshaped and found new ways around it. So B flat minor 7, he's got this honeysuckle rose piece of vocabulary. All around that B flat minor chord. That's all B flat Dorian if you're thinking scale wise. I prefer to think of chord tone, so I'm thinking of the 11, bringing that in before climbing that arpeggio to get to the 9. And then over the E flat 7, that Djangoism we spoke about earlier that we had on F7, that resolved to the 3rd of B flat, now we're doing it a whole tone lower, and resolving to the 3rd of A flat. Very important lick. 3, 5, flat 7, 1. So that's just E flat dominant 7. Then the flat 9, the sharp 9. And then resolving. So we have pretty great 2-5-1. Now just because we're getting short on time, I'm not going to take you through the process of putting that down in a loop and moving it around, but I do highly recommend it. Now we go into the C section and reuse the same opening bars we had from the A section, the iconic. Now something really interesting happens. We move into this 2-5 in the key of F minor. So notice how whenever we're using secondary dominants, or what some people might call auxiliary cadences, we're still staying true to the key that we're in, the key of A flat. Because we're targeting other chords from that key. So the F minor is your relative minor, your 6th chord. So you can think of this as the 2 and 5 of 6. So it all makes sense, it all connects to the key in some way, it's never just random. Over this he plays another phrase that I consider to be quite Django-y in flavour, uses a fair amount of harmonic minor. Let me do that with a looper just to give you the context. G minor 7 flat 5 to C7 to F minor. One, two, 1, 2, 3. Nice, right? Let me do that again. Again, it's important that you take these phrases in isolation like that and try and apply them to other progressions, because again, 2-5-1s are going to be in everything in jazz. So yeah, really useful to be lifting this vocabulary straight from the source. Now he spends a moment going back and forth between the 5 of F minor and the F minor itself. Kind of interesting. And he does something really playful, this kind of buzzing B sort of phrase. A ton of chromaticism in there. And then, a bit more sensible now, we play over the F minor. A lot of 1, 2, 3, 5 type stuff. And then to B diminished 7, where he straight up plays the arpeggio, before leaping a little higher, and then going chromatically down to the minor 3rd of C minor, because now we're going to get into this little rolling run of 2 5s to get back home to our A flat major chord. And he starts this run of 2 5s with a very common scale run. We're thinking C minor 7, flat 5 if we're going to extend it further, to F7, which if we think of the home context of those chords, they'd really belong to the key of B flat minor. So that can go some way to explaining why we would use this scale here, the scale being the B-flat harmonic minor scale. Notice how we're targeting important parts of the chord progression as well. The flat 3 of C minor is where we begin that scale run. And then here, at the midway point, is on the change to F7, where that's the major third. You know, being able to target the third of your chords is a very important concept. Now we have B flat minor 7 to E flat 7, and we play this. Again, a lot like one of the phrases we had earlier, where on the B flat minor, we use the arpeggio off the third of the chord, or the flat third to be specific. So that's a D flat major 7 arpeggio, right? And then, thinking E flat 7, you got the 5th, a little suspension around the 3rd, and then the root, and then we finish on the root of A flat, the 1 chord. A very straight sounding 2, 5, 1. Almost innocent in its purity. Now that little run of 2 5s that we just played there is such an important thing in jazz. It's a very common turnaround, so I think it's important that we isolate it and hear it in context with the chords underneath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Beautiful. I'll do it again. And there it is, the whole of Charlie Parker's Head for Donna Lee. What a great tune this is. So full of great vocabulary, like I said. Really try and lift some of your favourite licks from this and reuse them somewhere else. While I've been going through this with you, I've been thinking in the back of my mind, you know what would be quite fun in future might be to do a lesson on a particular group of licks isolated from this and how to reapply them to other standards. I think that could be a real project. Let me know in the comments what you reckon. Okay, now without any further ado, let's get on to the chord part that I played for this. Now for the first 16 bars, we're only going to use 3-note voicings. So we start with A flat major 7, that's root 7, 3, and then F7 with the 5th in the bass to begin with. So that's the 5, the 3, and the flat 7. Halfway through the bar, I raise to the root in the bass. You don't have to, but it's quite nice to alternate things, especially if you don't have a bass player with you at the time. Then B flat dominant 7. That's the root, the flat 7 and the 3rd. And then a bit of movement here. Rather than just holding on to that for 2 bars, which would be fine, it's nice to do the traditional thing and chuck in a sneaky little 2 chord. The thinking there is very simple, if you can remember this one rule. The dominant chords, at least 90% of the time, are going to be functioning as 5s. Always start with that generalization, and you can tweak it later on down the line for the odd occasion where it's not the case. But if you can think of this as 5 as soon as you see it, if you know that that's 5, you know that the world you're in is really the world of E flat major, right? Because that's the world in which B flat is 5. So then you can very easily think, okay, the 2 then would be F minor, or F minor 7 in this case. Again, we go for the 5th in the bass here. Always an easy way to add movement. Check it out, here's just 2 bars of B flat 7 to begin with. But now what about adding that F minor for some movement? Makes a big difference, right? A lot of ways you can try and include that sort of thing. Now we barrel straight into another 2-5, this time B flat minor 7 to E flat 7, but we take a little detour along the way. We go B flat minor 7 to E7 before dropping onto the E flat 7. So instead of just doing this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, we go 1, 2, passing chord, 1, 2, passing chord, to get back to the A flat, A7. We can be fancy and call this a tritone sub for the E flat 7 if we want, or you might just want to simply think, okay, just approach where you're going from a semitone above with a dominant chord. Now on the A flat major we get a bit of colour, again add a bit of movement, simply by going back and forth between a couple of different flavours of major. Major 7, major 6, rather than just holding on to major 7. Now in the next bar we could simply have A flat 7 leading us to the 4 chord, D flat. That A flat, again, assume it's functioning as 5, in which case it's the 5 of 4, right? Because D flat is the 4 chord in our home key of A flat. Again, we can think, okay, what about adding some movement by adding the 2 to that? So instead of a 5 of 4 and a 4, we have a 2, 5 of 4, and then the 4. So that would be E flat minor 7 to A flat 7. So now we're adding so much movement by just using these very common additions in the world of trad, jazz, and bebop. This is how you can turn a 3-chord song into 100 chords, or maybe not 100, but you get the idea. You know, you can really embellish a very simple progression if you understand these principles. Now we resolve that to D flat major 7. Now let's just recap and get up to that point again from the top. See how it all sounds in context at a slow tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now in this B section, we're going to again do what we did on the A flat major a minute ago, where we get a bit of movement by just simply going major 7 to major 6. And then we need the 4 minor, where we're going to do the same thing, minor 7 to minor 6, just to create a little bit of internal movement, and then back to the A flat. So that's that very common scenario of 4, 4 minor, taking you to the 1. We speak about that all the time in my videos. We're going to walk up to F7, A flat 6, just a chromatic run with this same little shape. So you've got, we could think of this as E flat 7 with the 5th in the bass, B diminished 7, I guess would be the correct name for that, F7 with the 5th in the bass. And then B flat 7, where we again add the F minor, but this time we continue climbing. Again, a run that you've seen me use many times, I'm sure. A really important run to know on a dominant chord. This is a Freddie Green style thing. You've got your B flat 7, your F minor 7 with the 5th in the bass, your B flat diminished or D flat diminished, and then a simple B flat major spread triad. Check out my Nuages chord melody lesson. Have a lot of those little climbs in there. So that's the 2 bars of B flat 7 accounted for. Now we need B flat minor 7, going to E flat 7. Again, that's a 2-5, isn't it, in the key of A flat? And this is a move that I've shown you before, but let's go through it again. It's a Barney Kessel style thing, or a Matt Munisterry style thing. A B flat minor spread triad, walk that middle note up until you reach the major 3rd of your E flat 7. So it's a simple little way of getting a 2-5. And then tritone sub for the 5 chord. A13, A7, and then we go for some big chords now, for a few bars at the very least. A flat 6-9. One of these chords that many people find impossible, myself included to begin with. It's a gypsy jazz favourite, this, and it involves some interesting techniques. Your thumb plays the bass, your second finger bars the 6th fret of strings A and D. You want to aim for the wood in between the strings. For more of these kinds of things and more in-depth looks at these voicings, check out my manoeuvres chord melody lesson. And then you've got your index finger playing the major 3rd, and then your 3rd finger barring the top 2 strings to bring in the 6 and the 9, hence the name A flat 6-9. Very authentic gypsy style voicing. F7 with an alternated bass. And again, we're going for some bigger voicings now. B flat 7, we trim it back to the 3-note voicings and do the little 2-5 thing, bringing in that F minor. Now for the C section, where we have our minor 2-5 one, we have G minor 7 flat 5, C7, F minor. But I add a lot of movement here. I go G minor 7 flat 5, and then I play an inversion of that chord. You know, if you think of G minor 7 flat 5 as your context, we have the flat 5 in the bass now, the minor 3rd and the flat 7. And then C7 3-note voicing for 2 beats before moving to the diminished 7th built off the major third of the chord, giving us that beautiful C7 flat 9 kind of voicing to match the phrases we've been looking at, that Django-y flavour. And then F minor 6, we're going to first of all play this voicing, which again I know some people find very tricky. I did myself, but you've got to work on it and then it won't be tricky. Miracle, eh? And then we go back to C7 flat 9, and then this time we go F minor 6, just 3-note voicing, where we trim this one that was frets 8, 10, 7, 9, we trim it back by deleting the D string and muting it. Again, I just want to point out that I have included my chord charts with this lesson pack in painstaking detail, every note, every voicing. So there should be no mysteries left at that point. Okay, then we go back to C7, where we use this fairly traditional grip, and then F minor 7 this time, because now we're thinking of this as part of a different manoeuvre. Unlike before, where F minor was our sort of tonic for the moment, you know, the relative minor side of the key, so we kind of hunkered down and brought in some good tonic flavour, like the minor 6th sound. This time we're thinking of the F minor as more of like a 2 chord in a 2-5, so we play it as a minor 7. Now it doesn't feel so tonic-y, it feels like more of a passing thing. And then we have the alternating bass, and then that's going to tie us very neatly down to B diminished 7, where we alter the melody a little bit. So that sounds beautiful, right? And again, that's a very common movement in jazz and swing music. Check out my After You've Gone chord melody lesson. That's one that personally I'm very proud of and think of as one of my better lessons, but unfortunately it's not had many views. So if you want to do me a favour and go and check that out, I'd be really grateful. Now we're on that final descending run where we could play something as simple as this: C minor 7, F7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, A flat major. And there's nothing wrong with that, that sounds awesome. But we're going to take this chance to throw in another very common sort of descending turnaround. So we're going to trade our C minor 7 for an A flat major spread triad in first inversion. You can see that they're pretty similar, so it's not really a massive change. And then this gives us the ability to create a bit more of a smooth rundown if we're thinking about voice leading and bass lines and all that. There's your B diminished, and then here's your B flat minor 7. So really, the middle note is staying exactly where it was, while everything else descends in semitones around it. And then we do the opposite here. The outer notes stay the same and the middle note descends a semitone, and you've got your E flat 7. So it's like the 1, and then you've got your 1 diminished, or flat 3 diminished, 2, 5, and then 1. To finish, gone for that massive 6-9 chord again, because it sounds so crisp. Whew, wow, what a marathon of a lesson this is. I actually didn't know it was going to be this long. You might call me naive, but I thought I could do this much quicker. But hey, I guess YouTube is the place for long form content, right? If you've made it this far, do let me know down in the comments, because I'm really proud of you. It takes a lot of focus. So what else is there to talk about? Well, I guess we could talk about technique. For the chord playing side of things, again, this is something I've spoken about at length in other videos, namely my minor swing chord study. But if I was to comprise a little bit of a checklist, just to, to hit all the sweet spots and summarize everything, the first rule of chord club is that we don't talk about chord club. No, the first rule of chord club is that every chord hit has to be staccato. Put a subtle accent on beats 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now to put some swing in there, it really comes courtesy of where you place a muted upstroke. So the upstroke has to be on muted chord with the left hand. Make sure that everything's lifted off the strings enough that the strings are dead. Put it in between, the and of 2 and the and of 4. So 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1. Now the later you leave that upstroke, the more gypsy it sounds. The earlier you do it, the more kind of lazy and American it sounds. No offense. Play around with that sort of grey area. It's also worth mentioning that you want to completely free float the hand for strumming. This broken wrist posture, as they call it, where you have your forearm rested on the upper bout of the guitar, which lets your wrist kind of dangle in the perfect place to strike the strings. Now, I guess at some point I'm going to have to stop talking, but first let me tell you about the gear. So the pick I'm using today, nothing special, Dunlop H3. Usually for this style, to be fair, I'd use something a bit different, more like a Blue Chips pick, or sometimes a Dunlop Prime Tone, or if I'm feeling really fruity, I might even use a Wigan Gypsy pick, which are like 3.5mm thick. Pretty ridiculous things, but they do have a sound. But like with all things when it comes to gear, I don't like to be beholden to things and locked into things, so I like to purposely make myself do stuff with things that are less than suitable, if you know what I mean, and make it work. So like quite often I'll use just a normal Dunlop pick. If you can't get the tone with a Dunlop pick, you can't get the tone with any pick, is the harsh truth of it all. The strings on here are Tomastic flat wounds, 12 gauge, they call them swing strings, and they're great on this guitar. They really help to tame some of that sizzly high end, which can be nice of course, but for this style you want it a little more muted. And the amp is a Lazy J J20, which is one of my favourite modern amps. It's essentially a Tweed Deluxe, you know, the 5E3 circuit of the old days. It's got a Celestian Blue speaker in there and it sounds phenomenal. There's a little bit of reverb courtesy of the Strymon Flint pedal, and that's about it. Okay guys, so I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Like I say, it's been a bit of a marathon, hasn't it? I didn't expect it to be so long, but hey, that's what you get sometimes. Do let me know if you've enjoyed it or if you have any questions at all. I love answering your questions, so don't hesitate. Maybe some requests for more songs in this sort of jazz swing bebop style that you might want me to dig into and break down. I want to try and address the balance of this channel a little bit more. I feel like we've leaned very blues heavy in the past year or so. I want to bring a bit more jazz back in because that's kind of what I started doing on this channel. I want to keep everything kind of in balance. It's like keeping all your plates spinning. It's like trying to eat 5 a day when it comes to your fruit and veg. It's not easy to do, but you know, we can get there. Oh, and do listen to Charlie Parker. To me, he's one of the most incredible improvisers of all time. Every time I listen to him, I feel really inspired. There was a ferociousness in his energy, like Django, but there was also such a beautiful fragility to his phrasing at times. You know, the way he would play over a ballad could be absolutely heartbreaking. So yeah, listen to Charlie Parker. All right, enough talking. I don't know why I'm talking so much. Usually I hate talking. Anyone that knows me knows that. All right, guys, take care, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.